The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Salerno in Afghanistan. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the helicopter pad, her combat boots dusty from the desert sand that seemed to get everywhere. She watched the Apache helicopters lined up like sleeping giants, their rotors still in the early morning calm. Her fingers unconsciously moved to the small tattoo on her neck, a habit she had developed over the years whenever she felt nervous or determined. Sarah had been serving as a logistics officer for 3 years now, coordinating supply chains and managing inventory for the base. It was important work, necessary work, but it was not what she had dreamed of doing when she first enlisted. Every morning she watched the pilots climb into their cockpits, and every morning she felt that familiar ache in her chest. She had applied for pilot training twice before, and twice she had been turned down. Not enough flight hours, they said. Focus on your current role, they suggested. The other officers on base knew about her dream. Some were supportive, nodding politely when she mentioned her applications. Others were less kind. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was one of the worst. He was a pilot himself, cocky and loud, the kind of man who believed that some people were simply born for certain roles and others were not. He had made his opinions about Sarah very clear. That morning, during the briefing in the operations tent, the topic of an upcoming training exercise came up. Colonel Harrison was discussing the need for additional pilots to participate in a mock combat scenario. Sarah saw her chance. She took a breath and raised her hand, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. She asked if there might be an opportunity for non-pilots to observe from the cockpit, to learn from experienced aviators during the exercise. Before the colonel could respond, Lieutenant Webb let out a sharp laugh that cut through the tent like a knife. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. Webb said that maybe they should let her fly it herself, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The tent fell silent. A few officers looked down at their papers, uncomfortable with the obvious mockery. Webb continued, asking if she thought she could just hop into an Apache and figure it out. He suggested that perhaps she had been playing flight simulator games on her laptop and thought that made her qualified. Other pilots joined in the laughter, though some seemed more uncertain than amused. Sarah felt heat rising to her face, but she kept her expression neutral. She had dealt with this kind of dismissal before. It hurt, but she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The colonel cleared his throat and tried to restore order, but the damage was done. He moved on to the next agenda item without addressing her question. Sarah sat through the rest of the briefing in silence, her jaw clenched tight. When the meeting ended, she walked out of the tent with her head held high, ignoring the whispers and sideways glances. Back in her quarters that afternoon, Sarah sat on her bunk and stared at the acceptance letter she had received just 2 days earlier. It was from a civilian flight school back in the States, offering her a spot in their advanced helicopter training program. She had applied months ago. Using her savings and her leave time to pursue the dream, the military seemed determined to deny her. The letter represented hope, but it also represented a difficult choice. If she took the civilian route, she might never get the chance to fly military aircraft. She might never prove to people like Webb that she belonged in that cockpit. Her roommate, Lieutenant Jennifer Park, came in and sat down beside her. Jennifer had been one of the few people who had always believed in Sarah's dream.
She asked what Sarah was going to do.
Sarah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She said she did not know yet, but she was tired of being treated like her dream was a joke. That evening, as the sun began to set over the mountains in the distance, Sarah went for a run around the perimeter of the base. The physical exertion helped clear her mind, helped her think. She had always been a fighter, even as a child growing up in a small town in Oregon. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan before she was born, working long hours at their restaurant to give her opportunities they never had. They taught her that respect was earned through hard work and perseverance, not given freely. They taught her that when people doubt you, you prove them wrong through action, not words. The tattoo on her neck was a reminder of that lesson. It was small and discreet, easily covered by her uniform collar, but meaningful to her. Most people on base did not even know it existed. It was a symbol from her grandmother, a woman who had survived war and poverty and discrimination, who had never let anyone tell her she was less than she was. Sarah touched it now as she ran, drawing strength from the memory. She did not notice the figure watching her from near the operations building, Air Marshal Richard Kovacs had arrived at the base that afternoon for a routine inspection tour. He was a decorated officer with over 30 years of service, known for his keen eye and his unwavering commitment to excellence. He had been walking the grounds observing the daily operations when he spotted Sarah running. There was something in her posture, in the determined set of her shoulders, that caught his attention. He made a mental note to learn more about the young captain. The next morning brought another challenge for Sarah. She was assigned to coordinate a supply delivery that required close communication with the aviation unit. This meant spending time in the Flight Operations Center, surrounded by pilots and their conversations about missions, maneuvers, and the pure joy of flying. It was both inspiring and painful to be so close to what she wanted, but could not have. Lieutenant Webb was there as usual, holding court with a group of younger pilots. He was describing a recent training flight with exaggerated hand gestures, making the story more dramatic than it probably was. When Sarah entered to deliver her reports, the conversation shifted. Webb noticed her immediately, and his eyes lit up with malicious amusement. He called out to her, asking if she had come to beg for flying lessons. The other pilots looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up to defend her. Webb continued, saying that maybe they could let her sit in the back seat sometime, for the full tourist experience. He suggested she could take pictures to show her friends back home. Sarah handed her clipboard to the operations officer without responding to Webb. She had learned that engaging with him only made things worse. But Webb was not finished. He stood up and walked closer to her, his voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. He said that some people needed to accept their limitations, that not everyone was cut out to be a pilot. He told her there was no shame in doing paperwork, that someone had to keep track of the bullets and beans. The room had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching to see how Sarah would react. She met Webb's eyes directly, her voice calm and measured when she finally spoke. She thanked him for his input and said she would keep his advice in mind. Then she turned and walked out of the operations center, her back straight and her steps even. Outside, she allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, to let the anger and humiliation wash over her and then recede. She would not cry. She would not let them see her break. Instead, she would do what she always did. She would work harder, push further, and find another way forward. What Sarah did not know was that Air Marshal Kovacs had been standing just outside the operations center during the entire exchange. He had come to review flight logs and had heard everything through the open window. His expression had grown darker with each mocking word from Webb. The Air Marshal had seen many things in his long career, but he had little tolerance for officers who built themselves up by tearing others down. Later that afternoon, Kovacs requested a meeting with Colonel Harrison. The colonel was surprised by the visit, but welcomed the Air Marshal into his office. Kovacs got straight to the point. He asked about Captain Sarah Chen, wanted to know her service record, her qualifications, her performance reviews. The colonel pulled up her file on his computer, somewhat confused by the interest in a logistics officer. As Harrison read through the file, his eyebrows rose. Sarah's record was exceptional. Top marks in every assignment, commendations for efficiency and leadership, and notably, she had completed private pilot training before joining the military. She had logged over 200 hours of flight time in civilian aircraft. The colonel admitted he had not realized she had such extensive flight experience. Her applications for military pilot training had been processed through different channels, and he had never personally reviewed them. Kovacs asked why her applications had been denied. The colonel looked through the notes and frowned. The reasons given were bureaucratic and vague. Insufficient operational need for new pilots at the time. Budget constraints for training slots. Priority given to candidates who had entered through aviation-specific programs. None of the reasons had anything to do with her actual ability or potential. The Air Marshal leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. He asked the colonel if he had been in the operations center that morning. Harrison admitted he had not. Kovacs then described what he had witnessed, the public mockery, the toxic atmosphere, the clear disrespect shown to a fellow officer. He said that in his experience, when good soldiers were treated this way, the organization lost valuable talent. He suggested that perhaps it was time to reconsider Captain Chen's applications. Colonel Harrison was a fair man, if sometimes too focused on procedure and protocol. The Air Marshal's words struck a chord with him. He promised to look into the matter personally. Kovacs nodded but pressed further. He suggested that perhaps Captain Chen could be given a proper evaluation, a chance to demonstrate her capabilities rather than having her fate decided by paperwork and prejudice. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected message. She was to report to Colonel Harrison's office the following morning. No explanation was given, and her mind raced with possibilities. Had someone complained about her confrontation with Webb? Was she being reprimanded for speaking up during the briefing? She barely slept that night, running through various scenarios in her head. When she arrived at the colonel's office, she was surprised to find Air Marshal Kovacs there as well. Both men stood when she entered, and the colonel gestured for her to sit. Sarah sat on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid with nervous anticipation. Colonel Harrison began by apologizing. He said he had reviewed her service record and her previous applications for pilot training. He acknowledged that she had not been given fair consideration and that her qualifications had been overlooked. Sarah was too stunned to respond immediately. An apology from a colonel was not something she had expected. The Air Marshal spoke next. His voice was firm but not unkind. He said he had heard about the incident in the operations center and that such behavior was unacceptable. He told Sarah that he had seen many talented people driven away from their dreams by small-minded individuals who felt threatened by competence. He said he did not want to see that happen to her. Then came the offer that would change everything. Colonel Harrison told her that they were prepared to give her an evaluation flight. An experienced instructor pilot would take her up in a training helicopter to assess her actual skills. If she performed well, they would expedite her application for Apache pilot training. It was not a guarantee, but it was a real chance, something she had been fighting for since she first arrived at the base. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She asked if they were serious, if this was really happening. The Air Marshal smiled slightly and said that he had learned over his career to trust his instincts about people. Something about her, about the way she carried herself and refused to give up despite constant discouragement, had caught his attention. He wanted to see if his instincts were correct. The evaluation flight was scheduled for 3 days later. Sarah spent every free moment preparing, reviewing flight manuals, studying helicopter systems, and running through emergency procedures in her mind. She knew this was her one real shot, and she could not afford to waste it. The pressure was immense, but she had trained for pressure her entire life. Word of the evaluation spread through the base quickly, as gossip always did in close military quarters. Reactions were mixed. Some officers were supportive, genuinely hoping she would succeed. Others were skeptical, viewing the whole thing as a waste of time and resources. Lieutenant Webb was predictably dismissive, telling anyone who would listen that giving her this chance was a mistake, that she would wash out and prove him right. Jennifer helped Sarah prepare mentally, quizzing her on procedures and offering encouragement. She reminded Sarah that she had already proven herself capable in civilian flight training. This was just another test, another obstacle to overcome. Sarah appreciated the support, but she knew the stakes were higher now. Failing would not just be a personal disappointment. It would validate every doubt, every mocking comment, every dismissal she had endured. The night before the evaluation, Sarah could not sleep. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, going over checklists and procedures. Around 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went outside. The base was quiet at this hour, just the sound of distant generators and the occasional radio chatter from the guard towers. She walked to the helicopter pad and stood looking at the aircraft silhouetted against the starry sky. She thought about her grandmother, the woman whose symbol she wore on her neck. Her grandmother had once told her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Sarah was afraid. She was terrified of failing, of confirming everyone's doubts, of losing this dream she had held on to for so long. But she would move forward anyway. As dawn broke over the mountains, Sarah reported to the flight line. Her instructor for the evaluation was Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres, a veteran pilot with over 15 years of experience. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, a man who cared about competence above all else. When Sarah met him, he shook her hand firmly and looked her directly in the eye. He told her that he did not care about politics or gossip. He only cared about whether she could fly. They completed the pre-flight inspection together, and Torres watched carefully as Sarah checked each system methodically and thoroughly. She explained her checks as she went, demonstrating her knowledge of the aircraft. Torres nodded approvingly at her attention to detail. When they climbed into the cockpit, Sarah felt a surge of emotion. She was finally here, in the pilot's seat, with a real chance to prove herself. Torres took them up first, demonstrating the aircraft's capabilities and letting Sarah get a feel for the controls. Then he turned control over to her. Sarah's hands were steady on the cyclic and collective, her feet responsive on the pedals. She took them through basic maneuvers first, showing smooth coordination and spatial awareness. Torres called out instructions, asking her to perform increasingly complex tasks, and Sarah executed each one with growing confidence. They practiced emergency procedures, simulated engine failures and rapid descents. Sarah's training and preparation showed in every movement. She was not just competent, she was good. Torres remained quiet during most of the flight, his experienced eye noting everything. When they finally landed after 90 minutes in the air, he sat in silence for a moment before speaking. Torres told her that was some of the best flying he had seen from a candidate in years. He said her control was smooth, her decision-making was sound, and her understanding of the aircraft was thorough. He asked where she learned to fly like that. Sarah explained about her civilian training, the hours she had put in on her own time and her own money, driven by a dream that kept getting pushed away. When they climbed out of the helicopter, a small crowd had gathered near the operations center. Air Marshal Kovacs was there, along with Colonel Harrison and several other officers. Lieutenant Webb was there too, his arms crossed and his expression sour. Sarah removed her helmet and walked toward them, her heart pounding but her head high. Torres spoke to the group, his voice carrying across the tarmac. He said that Captain Chen had not only passed the evaluation, but had exceeded his expectations. He recommended her immediately for Apache pilot training. The Air Marshal smiled and nodded, clearly pleased. Colonel Harrison looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But then Webb spoke up. He said that one good flight did not make someone a combat pilot. He suggested that maybe Torres was going easy on her, that the evaluation standards had been lowered. His words hung in the air like an accusation, and several people shifted uncomfortably. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Torres turned to Webb, and his expression was cold. He said that he had been flying helicopters since before Webb was born. He told Webb that questioning his professional judgment was insulting and inappropriate. He said that if Webb doubted the evaluation, he was welcome to review the flight data recorder, which captured every input and every response. The data would show exactly how well Sarah had performed. Air Marshal Kovacs stepped forward then, and his presence commanded immediate attention. He addressed the gathered officers, his voice firm and clear. He said that he had spent his career watching talented people prove themselves, and he had also watched insecure people try to tear them down. He stated that Captain Chen had earned this opportunity through her skills and her determination. Anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with him personally. The crowd began to disperse, some officers congratulating Sarah quietly, others walking away in silence. Webb left quickly, his face red with embarrassment and anger. Sarah stood there feeling almost dizzy with relief and joy. It was real. She had done it. She had proven herself where it mattered, in the cockpit, with her hands on the controls and her skill on full display. Colonel Harrison approached her and formally informed her that her application for Apache pilot training had been approved. She would begin the program in 6 weeks after completing some additional preparatory courses. He said he was sorry it had taken so long for her to get this chance, but he was confident she would excel. Sarah thanked him, her voice thick with emotion. The 6 weeks before pilot training began passed in a blur of preparation and transition. Sarah had to hand over her logistics duties to another officer, complete various administrative requirements, and undergo additional physical and psychological evaluations required for combat pilots. Every moment felt surreal, as if she might wake up and find it had all been a dream. The atmosphere on base had shifted noticeably. Some officers who had previously ignored her now went out of their way to speak to her, offering advice or sharing their own experiences in flight training. Others remained distant, perhaps uncomfortable with their earlier dismissiveness. Sarah tried not to focus on any of it. She had learned long ago that proving yourself was an ongoing process, not a single moment of triumph. Lieutenant Webb avoided her entirely, which Sarah considered a blessing. She heard through Jennifer that he had been called into Colonel Harrison's office for a private conversation about professional conduct. Whatever had been said, Webb emerged chastened and considerably quieter. The mocking comments stopped, at least in public spaces where others might hear. Air Marshal Kovacs remained at the base longer than originally planned, citing various inspection duties. Sarah suspected he wanted to ensure her transition to pilot training went smoothly, though he never said as much directly. He occasionally appeared at training sessions she attended, watching from a distance with his characteristic stern expression. His presence was both reassuring and intimidating. One evening, about 2 weeks before she was scheduled to leave for flight school, Kovacs asked to speak with her privately. They walked along the perimeter fence as the sun set, casting orange and pink light across the desert landscape. For a while, neither of them spoke, just walked in companionable silence. Finally, Kovacs asked about her tattoo. He said he had noticed it during one of the training sessions when her collar had shifted slightly. He was curious about its meaning if she was willing to share. Sarah was surprised by the personal question but found herself opening up. She told him about her grandmother, about the hardships she had survived, about the strength that had been passed down through generations of women in her family. The symbol was an ancient one, representing perseverance and quiet power. Her grandmother had worn it as a pendant, and Sarah had chosen to mark her skin with it as a permanent reminder of where she came from and what she was capable of. Kovacs listened intently, nodding with understanding. He told her that everyone who succeeded in difficult things carried something with them, some source of strength they could draw on when times got hard. He then shared his own story. As a young officer, he had faced significant discrimination because of his Eastern European heritage. This was during a time when Cold War tensions made anyone with a Slavic name suspect, regardless of their loyalty or service. He had been passed over for promotions, questioned more harshly than his peers, and forced to prove himself repeatedly in ways others never had to. The experience had made him sensitive to injustice, to the way talented people could be held back by prejudice rather than capability. That was why he had paid attention when he saw Sarah running that evening, why he had listened when he overheard the mockery in the operations center. He recognized the signs of someone being unfairly judged, and he had the power to do something about it. He told Sarah that her fight was not over, that flight school would be challenging and that some people would still doubt her. But he believed she had what it took to succeed. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes but blinked them back. She thanked Kovacs for believing in her, for giving her a chance when so many others had refused. He waved off her thanks, saying he had simply done what was right. He told her to focus on the training ahead, to learn everything she could, and to remember that she had already proven she belonged in that cockpit. When Sarah finally departed for flight school, a surprising number of people came to see her off. Jennifer was there, of course, along with Torres and several other pilots who had come to respect her determination. Colonel Harrison shook her hand and told her to make them proud. Even some of the officers who had been skeptical initially wished her luck. Their earlier doubts apparently reconsidered. The flight school was located at Fort Rucker in Alabama, a sprawling facility dedicated to training Army aviators. Sarah arrived with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She was one of only 3 women in her class of 32 students, and the only one who had come through an unconventional path. Most of her classmates had been planning their pilot careers since they first enlisted, following the traditional route through specialized programs. The first few weeks were intense. Classroom instruction covered everything from aerodynamics to weapon systems, from tactical doctrine to emergency procedures. Sarah threw herself into the studies, often staying up late to review material and ensure she understood every concept thoroughly. She could not afford to be merely adequate. She needed to excel. Her classmates were a mixed group. Some were friendly and collegial, treating her as an equal from the start. Others were more reserved, perhaps uncertain what to make of the logistics officer turned pilot candidate. A few were openly skeptical, questioning whether she had the necessary background to keep up with the rigorous program. Sarah ignored the doubters and focused on her work. The flight training portion began in the 4th week. They started with basic helicopters before transitioning to more advanced aircraft. Sarah felt at home in the cockpit, her civilian training and natural aptitude combining to make the early stages relatively smooth. Her instructors noted her quick learning and strong fundamental skills. She was not the top student in every category, but she was consistently in the upper tier of performance. However, challenges emerged as the training grew more complex. Combat maneuvers, formation flying, and tactical scenarios pushed everyone to their limits. Sarah struggled particularly with certain aggressive maneuvers that required overriding natural instincts for self-preservation. Her instructor, a gruff warrant officer named Patterson, told her she was thinking too much, being too careful. In combat, hesitation could be deadly. Sarah worked on being more decisive, more aggressive in her flying. She practiced emergency procedures until they became automatic, trained in simulators until the scenarios felt real. Slowly, she began to shed some of her caution, to trust her skills and react instinctively rather than analytically. Patterson noticed the change and pushed her harder, demanding more and accepting nothing less than her best effort. Halfway through the program, they received their first evaluation scores. Sarah had performed well overall, ranking 7th in her class. It was a strong showing, but she wanted to be higher. She wanted to prove beyond any doubt that she belonged there, that the faith Kovas and Torres had shown in her was justified. She intensified her efforts, spending extra hours in the simulators and seeking additional instruction whenever possible. As the weeks progressed, the training became increasingly demanding. Night flying operations challenged depth perception and spatial awareness. Formation flying required perfect coordination and trust in fellow pilots. Weapons training introduced the complexity of managing targeting systems while maintaining flight control. Each new skill built upon previous ones, creating a comprehensive but overwhelming curriculum. Sarah found an unexpected ally in one of her classmates, Captain David Rodriguez. He was a prior enlisted soldier who had worked his way up to officer and then into flight school through sheer determination. Like Sarah, he had faced skepticism about his unconventional path. The two of them often studied together, quizzing each other on procedures and discussing the challenges they faced. Rodriguez noticed that Sarah sometimes held back during aggressive maneuvers. That split second of hesitation that Patterson had identified. He suggested she might be overthinking the technical aspects and losing sight of the bigger picture. He told her to trust her training, to let her body react while her mind focused on tactics and objectives. It was advice that seemed simple but proved difficult to implement. The turning point came during a complex tactical exercise in the 10th week of training. Students were divided into teams and given a simulated combat scenario. Sarah's team was tasked with providing close air support for ground troops under heavy fire. The scenario involved multiple threats, friendly forces in close proximity to enemies, and rapidly changing conditions. It was designed to be overwhelming, to test decision-making under extreme pressure. Sarah was assigned as the lead pilot for her element, responsible for coordinating with ground forces and managing the tactical situation. As the scenario began, everything seemed to happen at once. Radio calls overlapped, threats appeared from multiple directions, and the ground commander was calling for immediate support. Sarah felt the familiar urge to slow down, to carefully analyze each element before acting. But then she remembered Rodriguez's advice and Patterson's criticism. She remembered her grandmother's strength and Kovach's faith in her abilities. She took a deep breath and let her training take over. Her hands moved instinctively on the controls while her mind processed the tactical picture. She made rapid decisions, delegating tasks to her wingman, coordinating with the ground forces, and engaging threats with precision and confidence. The scenario lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it ended and they returned to base, Sarah was exhausted and uncertain about her performance. There had been moments of confusion, close calls with friendly fire boundaries, and decisions made on instinct rather than careful calculation. She worried she had been too aggressive, too quick to act. The after-action review surprised her. The instructors praised her tactical awareness and decisive leadership. Patterson, who rarely gave compliments, said she had shown exactly the kind of combat mindset needed in an Apache pilot. She had managed multiple priorities simultaneously, made sound decisions under pressure, and maintained control throughout the chaos. Her performance had been one of the best in the class. Sarah felt a surge of validation. This was what she had been working toward, proof that she could not only fly but excel in the demanding role of combat aviator. Her classmates congratulated her, and even those who had been skeptical seemed to view her differently now. She had earned their respect through performance, just as Torres and Kovac had told her she would. As the training program entered its final phase, students began focusing on the Apache helicopter specifically. This was the aircraft Sarah had dreamed of flying. The powerful attack helicopter with its advanced weapon systems and sophisticated technology. The transition from training helicopters to the Apache was significant. The aircraft was heavier, more complex, and demanded greater skill and coordination between pilot and gunner. Sarah absorbed every detail about the Apache. She studied its systems obsessively, learned its capabilities and limitations, and practiced in the simulator until the cockpit layout became second nature. The Apache required a different mindset than other helicopters. It was not just about flying. It was about managing a weapons platform while maintaining situational awareness and coordinating with other elements of a combined arms team. Her final evaluation flights went well. She demonstrated proficiency in all required tasks, from basic flight operations to complex combat scenarios. Her shooting scores were above average. Her tactical decision-making was sound, and her crew coordination skills were excellent. When the final class rankings were posted, Sarah had finished 4th overall. It was a strong performance that validated everything she had worked for. Graduation day was both celebratory and bittersweet. Sarah was proud of what she had accomplished, but she also thought about how long it had taken to get here, how many obstacles had been placed in her path. She received her wings in a formal ceremony, pinned on by Patterson, who told her quietly that she had earned them through skill and determination. She wore her dress uniform with the collar open enough to reveal just a hint of her grandmother's symbol, a small act of defiance and remembrance. Several distinguished guests attended the graduation, including senior officers from various commands. Sarah was surprised and moved to see Air Marshal Kovac among them. He had made a special trip to attend, wanting to see the outcome of the opportunity he had helped create. When he congratulated her after the ceremony, he told her that his instincts had been correct. She had proven herself worthy of the chance she had been given. Kovac also delivered some unexpected news. He had been following her progress through reports from her instructors. Based on her performance and potential, he had recommended her for assignment to an elite Apache unit that was forming for deployment to a challenging operational area. It was a competitive position that usually went to pilots with more experience, but Kovac had advocated for her, arguing that talent and determination mattered more than time in service. Sarah was overwhelmed by the opportunity, but also nervous. An elite unit meant high expectations and intense scrutiny. She would be working with some of the best pilots in the Army, people who had years of combat experience. Would they accept her? Would she be able to perform at their level? Kovac seemed to read her thoughts. He reminded her that she had already faced doubt and exceeded expectations. This would be no different. The assignment would begin in 3 weeks, giving Sarah time to complete some additional training and prepare for deployment. She returned to her original base briefly to gather her belongings and say goodbye to the people who had supported her journey. Jennifer threw her a small celebration, inviting the few officers who had believed in Sarah from the beginning. It was a happy evening filled with laughter and optimism about the future. Colonel Harrison pulled her aside during the celebration to apologize again for not recognizing her potential sooner. He admitted that he had been too focused on procedures and traditional paths, missing the obvious talent that had been right in front of him. He told Sarah that her success had prompted him to review how the base evaluated and supported soldiers with unconventional backgrounds. Changes were being made to ensure others would not face the same obstacles she had encountered. The elite Apache unit was based at a forward location near the border region, an area known for complex terrain and challenging operational conditions. When Sarah arrived, she was immediately struck by the professionalism and intensity of the environment. These were seasoned combat pilots, men and women who had flown dozens or even hundreds of missions. They had seen real combat, faced real threats, and lost friends in the line of duty. The unit commander was Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves, a decorated pilot with a reputation for excellence and high standards. He welcomed Sarah but made it clear that her selection to the unit was controversial. Some of his officers had questioned bringing in a newly qualified pilot, When there were more experienced candidates available, Reeves told her directly that she would need to prove herself quickly and convincingly. There was no room for weakness or hesitation in his unit. Sarah understood the situation. She was walking into an established team where she would be evaluated constantly, where every mistake would be magnified and every success scrutinized. It was similar to her experience at the original base, but with much higher stakes. These pilots were not dealing with logistics and routine operations. They were preparing for combat missions where lives depended on split-second decisions and flawless execution. Her gunner assignment came as another surprise. She would be crewed with Chief Warrant Officer Alex Martinez, one of the most experienced gunners in the unit. Martinez had a reputation for being demanding and outspoken. He had flown with many pilots over his career and had strong opinions about what made a good crew team. When they first met, he looked her over with obvious skepticism and asked how many combat hours she had. When Sarah admitted she had none, Martinez shook his head and muttered something about politics and quotas. The first few training flights with Martinez were tense. He questioned her decisions, critiqued her tactics, and seemed to be waiting for her to make a significant mistake. Sarah remained professional and focused, executing her duties with precision and trying to anticipate what Martinez needed from her as a pilot. She knew she was being tested, that Martinez was trying to determine if she was capable or just another officer who had been promoted beyond their abilities. During their third training flight together, they were running a close air support scenario with ground units. The exercise involved multiple aircraft, complex terrain, and simulated threats that required careful coordination and aggressive tactics. Sarah was managing the aircraft and coordinating with other elements when Martinez suddenly called out a time-sensitive target that required immediate engagement. Without hesitation, Sarah maneuvered the Apache into an optimal firing position, managing altitude and angle while maintaining awareness of friendly forces and other threats. Her movements were smooth and decisive, giving Martinez the stable platform he needed for accurate engagement. They worked together seamlessly, her flying complementing his weapons management, and they successfully eliminated the simulated target within seconds. After they landed, Martinez was quiet during the post-flight checks. Sarah expected criticism, some comment about what she could have done better. Instead, as they walked away from the aircraft, Martinez stopped and turned to face her. He said that was good flying, that she had given him exactly what he needed when he needed it. He admitted he had been skeptical about flying with a new pilot, but she had shown solid skills and good instincts. It was not effusive praise, but coming from Martinez, it meant everything. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Martinez developed a strong working relationship. They flew training missions almost daily, refining their coordination and building the kind of trust that only comes from shared experience. Martinez began offering advice rather than criticism, teaching her the subtle tricks and techniques he had learned over years of combat operations. Sarah absorbed everything, constantly improving and adapting. The other pilots in the unit gradually warmed to her as well. They saw that she was serious about her role, that she worked harder than necessary to prove herself, and that she had genuine talent. During mission planning sessions, she offered thoughtful input and asked intelligent questions. In the air, she flew with confidence and precision. Slowly but surely, she was earning her place in the elite unit. Then came the news that would test everything she had learned. The unit was being deployed on an urgent mission. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a remote location, a terrorist leader responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces. The mission required a coordinated strike involving ground forces, drone surveillance, and Apache air support. It would be Sarah's first real combat operation. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves called a mission briefing the evening before the operation. The room was packed with pilots, gunners, and support personnel. Reeves laid out the mission parameters, showing aerial photographs of the target area and discussing the various threats they might face. The terrain was challenging, with mountains and narrow valleys that would limit maneuverability. The enemy was known to have anti-aircraft weapons, making the operation particularly dangerous. Sarah listened intently, her mind processing every detail. She would be flying as part of a four-ship element, providing overwatch and immediate response capability for the ground assault team. Her role was critical but also exposed. If the ground team encountered heavy resistance, she and Martinez would need to provide close air support under potentially intense fire. There was no room for error. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She lay in her bunk going over the mission plan repeatedly, visualizing every phase, every contingency. She thought about all the training, all the obstacles she had overcome to reach this point. Tomorrow she would finally be doing what she had always dreamed of, flying an Apache in combat, protecting soldiers on the ground. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Before dawn, the unit began final preparations. Sarah completed her pre-flight checks methodically, forcing herself to focus on each task despite the nervous energy coursing through her. Martinez arrived and began his own preparations, and they went through their crew coordination checklist together. He asked if she was ready, and Sarah nodded firmly. She was as ready as she would ever be. The flight to the objective area took 45 minutes, the 4 Apaches flying in tactical formation through the darkness. Sarah monitored her instruments and maintained position, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline. As they approached the target area, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the mountainous terrain. The ground team inserted without incident and began their approach to the target compound. Sarah's element established an orbit pattern, providing surveillance and ready to respond if needed. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Then the radio crackled with urgent calls. The ground team was taking fire from multiple positions, and casualties were reported. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves immediately directed Sarah's element to provide support. Sarah felt time slow down as she processed the information. Martinez was already identifying targets, calling out positions and threats. Sarah maneuvered the Apache aggressively, positioning for Martinez to engage while avoiding enemy fire and staying clear of friendly forces. The training took over and she flew with decisive confidence. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes but felt like an eternity. Sarah and Martinez eliminated 3 enemy positions, allowing the ground team to press their assault. Other Apaches engaged additional threats, and together they suppressed the enemy resistance. The mission was successful, with the target eliminated and the ground team extracted safely. Sarah had flown her first combat mission, and she had performed exactly as trained. The flight back to base was somber despite the mission's success. Everyone was aware of how dangerous the situation had been, how close they had come to losing people. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that it was over, pride in her performance, and a new understanding of the serious nature of what she had chosen to do. This was not a training exercise or a career goal. This was life and death. After debriefing and equipment checks, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves pulled Sarah aside. He told her she had done well, that her flying had been solid and her decisions sound. He said he had been watching her closely, not just during the mission but throughout her time with the unit. He admitted he had doubts initially about bringing in such a new pilot, but those doubts had been proven wrong. She had earned her place through performance, not politics or connections. The other pilots in the unit treated her differently after that mission. She was no longer the new pilot who needed to be tested. She was a proven member of the team, someone who had faced combat and performed well. Martinez told her she was the best pilot he had flown with in years, and coming from him, that was the highest compliment possible. Sarah called Air Marshal Kovac a few days later to thank him for everything he had done. She told him about the mission, about how all the training and preparation had come together when it mattered most. Kovac listened and then told her something she would never forget. He said that talent and determination could take someone far, but character took them all the way. She had shown character when she refused to give up despite constant discouragement, and that character had brought her to where she was now. Months passed and Sarah flew dozens more missions. She became one of the most reliable pilots in the unit, known for her steady performance and tactical intelligence. The doubts and mockery from people like Lieutenant Webb seemed like distant memories from another life. She had proven everything she needed to prove, not through words or complaints, but through action and excellence. One day, she received an unexpected email from a young female soldier stationed at another base. The woman had heard about Sarah's journey from logistics officer to Apache pilot and wanted advice about pursuing her own dream of flight training. Sarah read the email several times, remembering how isolated and discouraged she had felt during her own struggle. She wrote back immediately, offering encouragement and practical advice. That email was the first of many. Word had spread about the logistics officer who had fought her way into an Apache cockpit, and Sarah found herself becoming an informal mentor to other soldiers facing similar obstacles. She answered every message personally, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to persist despite challenges. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her own achievements, a way to help others avoid the frustrations she had endured. Years later, when asked about her journey, Sarah always emphasized the same themes. Talent mattered, but persistence mattered more. Allies were crucial. People like Kovacs, Torres, Jennifer, and Martinez had made her success possible. And most importantly, believing in yourself when others did not require drawing on something deeper than confidence. It required knowing who you were and where you came from. She still wore her grandmother's symbol on her neck, though now it was joined by other marks of her journey: her pilot wings, her unit patch, and the respect of people who had once doubted her. She had not just achieved her dream of flying the Apache, she had proven that paths to success were not always straight or traditional, that determination and skill could overcome prejudice and obstacles, and in doing so, she had opened doors for others who would come after her, facing their own doubts and their own battles to pursue their dreams.